Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to my weekly live chat. I'm super excited to be here talking about quilting and one of my favorite things, which we know. If you're joining for the first time, I'm so glad you're here. If you've watched several of these, I'm so glad you're here. As usual, I have Jessica behind the camera monitoring the chat. So if you have a question, just put it in the chat and she will give it to me at the end. Plus, I have a giveaway for you guys. So it's going to be a fun, informative chat. I'm going to talk about designs or tips for picking out designs for sampler quilts. But before we get to that, a couple of housekeeping things. If you've watched any of my previous live chats, you know that we are getting ready to start a new free motion quilting class free on my YouTube channel. And I have products that kind of go with that. You can check out my earlier live chats to see all those details. But products have come in and orders are starting to ship out. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule. It's really fun. So you can look for some happy mail if you've placed an order. Now next week, I won't be here for a live chat because I'm teaching some hands-on long arm classes here at our event space and getting ready for our annual quilt walk. So I won't be here next Thursday, but I'm sure we can make it through that, right? All right, so if you're watching live, I have a giveaway. And all you have to do to enter the giveaway is just leave a comment to Jessica and she'll randomly pick a winner. And the prize is going to be this brand new panel I designed for the Quilt Walk quilt. So we'll talk more a little bit more about that. But this panel is pretty cool. It's 15.5 inches wide, or this way, and then 42 inches wide. It's like the perfect jump start for a project. And it features some fabric prints from my most current collection. Like I said, one lucky winner will win it. We'll pick a winner at the end, but if you're like, oh, I really want that, you can click the link in the description box below. For limited time, we have it on sale. So normally it's $19.99, but we have it for $16.99, so you can get that within the next couple days. So anyway, good luck. Hopefully you win. Anyway, let's switch over to the pictures here. This is just the panel I'm giving away. You can kind of see it without me kind of trying to hold it up. It features prints from my pumpkin season fabric line. So it's kind of fall inspired, but like that kind of purpley, pinkish gold, kind of fun. And you can kind of see zoomed in here. So good luck. Hopefully you'll win. All right, let's talk about quilting sampler quilts. So when I'm going about my life and working, there's always stuff that's going on. And right now we're kind of getting ready to launch that Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series. We're getting ready for our annual quilt walk. And so sometimes those just kind of overlap. And so this is the featured quilt for Quilt Walk. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But as I was looking at it, getting ready to quilt it, I thought, oh my gosh, there's a lot of negative space in here. So we're going to see some kind of hints into what we'll learn during the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, and then obviously get some tips for picking out those designs. Now, Quilt Walk is coming up June 7th. We're in the Kansas City area, just outside in Liberty, and I know not everybody lives here, but that's our big event where you come downtown, you stop at the shop, and you get a map where you can wander around and find the pieces to make that quilt that you just saw. So really, really fun time. And the windswept is the pattern that we're going to be making. So that's the featured quilt, and that's what I was quilting. The thing about sampler quilts is there's so many different blocks. They're great skill builders. It's a great way to practice coming up with different designs, but it can kind of give you some decision fatigue. So what I'm going to do is give you some tips to help make that a little bit easier should you be working on this quilt or really any kind of sampler quilt. Now, if you're not in the area and you're like, but I really like that quilt, thank you, you can actually pre-order the kit. So you can click the link in the description box and it will have links to the panel, links to the kit, all that kind of good stuff. So you can definitely take advantage of that. So it's not very often that I piece quilts. I'm kind of the opposite of most quilters. I pay people to piece and bind so I can quilt them. But this one I actually pieced at a little sewing retreat kind of thing. And so I thought, well, I might as well go ahead and quilt it because of all of that background area. I'm like, ooh, that's going to be a fun place to play. So I was kind of under a deadline though, because obviously Quilt Walk is coming up very, very soon. And so there's nothing quite like a deadline to help you get stuff done. Right? I kind of like to joke, I heard somewhere that it says the best results come from a good plan and not quite enough time to achieve it. So sometimes giving a deadline will make it happen. So I decided to quilt it on my long arm because I needed to get it done fast. And truly, even though I love to quilt on my sewing machine, all my bigger projects, all the projects that I, want to get done pretty quick, I do on a long arm. So here it is unquilted, kind of getting ready to start. Now, when I began quilting it, I thought, oh, I'm going to take in-progress pictures and I'm going to take video and all this stuff, and I didn't really do that. I've got a couple in-progress pictures, but usually I just kind of get going and I kind of forget about it. But as we can see here, you can see that sampler idea. Now, if you're like, I don't know what a sampler quilt is, it's just a quilt with a lot of different blocks. It's just it could be a block of the month, it could just be the way that it's written, and this one has several different blocks as well. So when I loaded it, the first thing I was kind of thinking about was this upcoming video series, the Negative Spaces Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. And I like already kind of in that mode because I'm filming and preparing the handouts. So I'm like, well, might as well just stick with it. So a lot of the things that I did on that quilt in those negative spaces or background areas are techniques taken from this video series that's coming July 1st. So super excited. Again, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, check out my previous live chat because I go into all detail with that. Now, when you're looking at a sampler quilt, the decision fatigue can be so rough, right? Because you're like, every block is different. They're not all exactly the same. The first thing I like to do is to determine a background. Once I have that background picked, then I can say, okay, in this example, all of that cream color fabric is going to be the background, and I'm going to quilt it all the same. That right there kind of takes off a big chunk of the decision-making process. And it doesn't have to all be the same fabric. You could decide that, you know, even if it's different background fabrics, you can decide that this is going to be my background. It's just kind of starting to designate those areas. Now, when you're quilting the background area, go ahead and pick a design that you feel somewhat comfortable with. If you're like, Angela, I'm new to free motion quilting, nothing feels comfortable, well, I promise, by the time you get done with the quilt, you will feel comfortable with it. The reason I say that is usually the background area is a lot bigger, and it's going to be a bulk of what we're quilting. And so sometimes I think it's great to save your effort for the blocks or kind of give yourself a time to, you know, catch up with yourself a little bit. Of course, if you're like, no, don't tell me what to do, I want to quilt it, you know, crazy, then I think that's great as well. So for the background area, I decided I was just going to combine a bunch of different designs, kind of working around those blocks. Just, you know, you can see here pebbles and paisleys and leaves and just things that I like to quilt. But then I thought, you know what, if I change up the size or the scale of some of those designs, they'll really kind of pop out. And so what I wanted to do is kind of have some of those bigger designs kind of pop out and kind of help fill in that little bit of a wreath kind of look. So I did. I went ahead and kind of filled in like some little teardrop or leafy shapes, kind of just throwing them in as I quilted. Now the trick here is by changing the size, anytime there's a difference, our brain is kind of attracted to it. So it kind of pops out a little bit because of this different size compared to the filler. And I didn't really like plan out what I was going to do where. I just, as the notion hit, I just would quilt a shape if I had room for it. And so here you can see a little bit like a leafy kind of shape. And then I wanted to make sure that you can really kind of see it with all the other quilting that was around it. So I kind of traveled over it a couple times. Now that is a little bit of showing off, but I love the machine quilting, so it's kind of a lot of fun there. Here we can kind of see, kind of stepping back and looking at the finished quilt, you can kind of see those pops of unquilted area in there. Now, I think it's so important when you show people your quilts that you don't point out your mistakes or you don't point out what you wished you had done different. But I'm a professional, so I can do that. One thing I wish I had done is I wish I would have added more of those shapes to fill in those spaces. Not only would the quilting have gone quicker, but I think it would have been more visually, more like a wreath. But you know, you learn. Every time you get done with a quilt, you've learned something, and sometimes knowing what not to do is just as good as learning what to do. So you can kind of see some of those shapes in there. Some flowers, some leaves, again, just kind of throwing them in as I kind of felt led. If you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to breathe and then I can't really do that, then give yourself a routine. In between the blocks, I'll put a flower. Around these blocks, I'll put a leaf. I mean, you can kind of really play around with that and have a lot of fun. So you can kind of see some different details in there. It was really fun just to think, oh, you know what, I'm gonna put a flower here and a little teardrop there. So kind of working through that. Now, it's kind of hard to see in the pictures because the background is kind of lighter, but I ended up going with a pink thread. So I kind of loved that pink color in the fabric, but that wasn't my first choice. The first thread color I picked out was actually like a yellowy kind of gold, like a, I can't remember, buttercup, I think. It was really pretty, but it just, I don't know, it didn't look quite right. So in some of these pictures, you might see some yellow thread and be like, wow, that's different. That's just because I quilted some of the blocks and I thought, you know what, I don't like this. I'm gonna switch to the pink, and I just left them on there. So again, you can see a little bit more of the detail. When you're trying to pick out thread colors, kind of ask yourself, what's my favorite color in the quilt, and kind of maybe use that as a guide. I loved the pinkish kind of color, so that's why I went with that. And you can see a little bit more of the detail there. I know that when you're newer to something, it's hard to relax while you're doing it, right? You're like so focused on it and so kind of frustrated, but eventually you'll get to a point where your mind can just wander as you're quilting, and it's almost like meditation, which Again, if you're new, you're like, I don't believe it, but it's true. And so as I was quilting, I was just kind of having fun throwing in shapes as I went. So try not to overthink the quilting that you're doing. It should be fun, right? We have enough stuff that's hard to do in life. Let's not make stressing out about our quilting that way. So you can kind of see some details around there. Kind of fun. All right, but then when it comes to the blocks, right? So now we have a lot of different shaped blocks, a lot of different size pieces. The number one thing I would say is pick one or two or three designs that can be used in a lot of different ways. Versatile designs, right? So you can see here, I've got some feathers. Now, I love quilting feathers. I don't find them difficult. I'm pretty quick at it. But this is all kind of what's relative to you. But I know that I can fit those petals in different shapes and in different areas. So I did some feathers, some continuous curve, and then some dot-to-dot quilting, which we'll see all that. Being able to use those shapes in a lot of different areas kind of makes the selection process a little bit easier, and also kind of like, I don't know, let you do the same thing over and over again, just in different ways in each of the blocks. So here we can kind of see this particular block. I did some feathers, and what you can't see in the darker print is I did some echo lines. So remember, echoing is our best quilting friend. And that's another thing we'll be seeing in the Negative Spaces Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. Echoing inside that block, just kind of show off that shape and then move on. So feathers were one of them, and then also continuous curve. Now we're gonna see this in July when the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video starts. Continuous curve is like the most valuable player, right? It's the MVP of designs because it really can go in blocks of all shapes and sizes. It's hard to tell in that little octagon to the side, but I have continuous curve there. And then even in the little 9 patch right there, you can kind of see a little bit of the curve there. So it's just a really easy way to quilt those blocks and then be able to continue on. And depending on how over the top you go with it, it can look really kind of custom, or it can be fairly simple and basic if that's what you prefer. Now, another thing that we're going to talk about in the video series is echoing. So you already know, spoiler alert, echoing is our best quilting friend. When I have smaller blocks like that 9 patch, using the echoing kind of helps build them up and helps keep them from kind of getting lost in the rest of the quilting. And so you can see a little bit of echoing around there. It's not something I did on every block, but I just kind of liked throwing it in, as I went. Serpentine lines are another great design that can be used in a lot of different ways, and you can kind of see it in the pink kind of shape in that pinwheel right there. Serpentine lines go from one side to the next, and they're kind of perfect for those 1 to 2 inch wide strips, and so I love it in kind of blocks like that. Now, I do want to stop and say that these are designs I feel comfortable quilting. You're going to pick designs that you feel comfortable quilting that can be used in a lot of different ways. So it doesn't have to be over the top like this. I could have done an overall design over the whole quilt and it would have looked amazing. So instead of being intimidated, I want you to be inspired to use these designs on your quilts. And here we can see a little bit more of the continuous curve in the blocks. One thing I like to do, and I don't know if this makes me sound crazy, but I like to challenge myself. Like, how many different ways can I quilt continuous curve in an octagon? Kind of giving myself like something to practice. And when I quilt a design, if I don't love how it looks, I don't take a picture of it and I don't show anybody. So sometimes challenging yourself and seeing how many variations you can come up with, you might be surprised what you would see. And then here's another example of more feathers, more continuous curve in those gold triangles, and then that diagonal kind of dot-to-dot design in the lighter pink square. So dot-to-dot is just quilting geometric lines that connect certain points on your block. And it can be just like continuous curve. It can be as ornate and as custom as we want, or it can be as basic as we like. So those 3 designs right there are the ones you'll see over and over again in the pictures I'm going to show you. It's funny because I always feel like eventually people will realize I'm kind of just a one-trick pony. I'm just doing the same designs over and over again. But until they do, I'll just keep doing it. But here you can see just a slightly different application of it. And of course, a little bit of echoing in there. We can see a little bit more of the flower meander, or that flower kind of swirl feather in that octagon shape. We've got some dot-to-dot and continuous curve in that block. I didn't plan out all the blocks before I started. Of course, you could if that's kind of makes you happy, makes you comfortable, definitely. But just as a block would as I would approach a block, I would just kind of think, what do I feel like quilting here, and just kind of go with it. Another example here is using some quilting to build up those smaller blocks. This block is tiny, it's about 3 inches. And so just adding some of those diagonal lines helps build it up a little bit. This is a great way to show off your favorite blocks. Because let's be honest, if we're making a sampler quilt, if I'm making a sampler quilt, I'm practically guaranteed that some of the blocks are not going to be pieced great. So I can use the quilting to show off the blocks that I love, and then, kind of distract from the ones that maybe didn't get pieced quite right. And so this is something I would do around a block if I like how it turned out, or I really want to show it off. If it's not pieced well, I'm just going to do an overall design over the top of it and call it good. So you don't even have to make it custom for each block. You can pick 1 or 2 blocks to quilt differently and then just do an overall over the rest of the quilt. I think it could be truly as hard or as easy, or as complex or as easy as you want to make it. And then just a little bit more examples of that feather in the shapes, some more continuous curve in the blocks, and then some diagonal dot-to-dot quilting. Now, since I was working on a long arm, I'm kind of working down in rows, kind of just hitting those sections as I come. But if you're working on a sewing machine, the great thing is you can pick and choose where you want to start. So picking a design that you feel comfortable quilting, or the one that is the least to make you feel like you're going to throw up, you can start with there and kind of get warmed up before you go into the blocks or into those parts that might be a little scary. Here we can see a little bit more of that echoing and some of the more feathers. Again, same designs over and over again, just different applications of it. Now, if you do make a sampler quilt and you quilt it, I can't encourage you enough to take pictures of your blocks. It's such a nice reference to come back to should you have another quilt and you're like, oh, I can't decide how to quilt it. So even with your cell phone, just take a couple pictures and keep them in a folder, and that way you can refer to them later. And here we can see another example. You might think, okay, continuous curve over and over again, echoing, oh, it's gonna, all look the same, but it really just fits the block. We're just using the block as a guide here. And so we can see that curve. And then in that thinner strip around the outside of it, that's only about 1 inch. So I went ahead and just did a nice kind of bracket shape. It's kind of hard to see in that busier fabric. That bracket shape kind of quilts pretty quickly for me. It helps me get from the corner to the inside and then back out. And I just like how it looks nice in those smaller strips. Now, when I'm looking at a quilt or I'm working through a quilt, you might think, oh, there's this deep reason that she did this one thing. And that's actually probably not the case. As I work through the quilt, I'm asking myself, where do I need to go and how can I get there? Right? So the designs I'm picking are going to help get me either across a block or back to where I start, or however that works. So really, I'm not focusing too much on design itself, like, oh, I like this. I just focus on where it's going to make me end up. So some more feathers, some more serpentine lines, and then just for fun, a little bit of swirl there. Now, a great thing about sampler quilts is when you're done with it, you have a lot to look at because there's a lot of different blocks and stuff, and so it's pretty fun to kind of go back over this. Although I just finished this the other day, so it's not like it's too far out of my memory. Some more dot-to-dot quilting in those golden shapes. So again, just finding those designs that you can use in a lot of different ways, challenging yourself, combining them. Here's some diagonal dot-to-dot with some curves, just having fun with it, truly. I mean, I know it can be scary because you're like, oh, I spent a lot of time and a lot of money on this quilt, but I promise when you're done and you step back, you just kind of see that beautiful overall texture. So more of those blocks. Another thing is if your sampler quilt has, sometimes they'll have similar blocks or like maybe the same block a couple times. You don't have to always quilt it the same way. So I just picked a bunch of different ways to quilt it and just had fun with it. So you can see even more with that little flower shape. And then we already saw this one, but same idea. We're kind of using some different designs to show that off. All right, though, you would think, wouldn't you, like, okay, I designed the pattern, I designed the fabric, I made the quilt. Like, surely by this point, I know how I'm going to quilt this quilt. And that's actually not the case. I'm like, I just kept the blocks were easy, but in all that big negative space, I wasn't sure what to do in the center and even in the corners. Sometimes I want to do a particular design or a certain technique, but I know it's going to take a while and I just don't have time for it. And this is a perfect example. If I had unlimited time to quilt this, I might have done something a little different. I definitely probably would have done some more bigger feathers. But since I am a little bit limited on time, I needed to get it done, I went with a design that's quicker for me to quilt, the swirl chain. Still looks great. I still love how it turns out. But sometimes the designs that you pick are dependent on how much time you actually have to do it. So in the center, I decided I wanted to kind of emphasize that wreath or circular kind of shape, and so I wanted to quilt that swirl chain so that it worked its way around kind of in the center. Now, sometimes when I'm talking or doing my live chats, people will ask if I mark out my designs beforehand. And at this point in my quilting journey, I don't. I feel comfortable kind of free, winging it. Now, in the beginning, I definitely would have. But this will kind of give you an example of the marking that I do. So it's hard to see, but I have kind of a wreath kind of marked here, some circles. I'm using the markings just as a guide, just to help me keep it somewhat even, because I knew, since it's such a big area, once I did the top, I might forget exactly where to go on the bottom or how close to get to the rest of it. So I love to use my marking tools to help give me a guide to follow. So that kind of is a perfect example of that. So first I quilted the outer swirl chain, and then I came in and quilted the inner swirl chain kind of around that center block. Again, just to kind of build it up, add some detail. It's a little bit smaller in the center, a little bit more ornate. We'll see why here in a second. But it's the same idea, same design, just a slight different size of it. So you don't have to think of 500 different designs to quilt your quilt. You can pick a couple of your favorites and do that. So here we can kind of see, kind of zoomed in on that center block. So I quilted that swirl chain so it wrapped around. And then to help it look a little bit more motif-like, a little bit more ornate, I added some echo lines around the outside and then put some pebbles in between some of those echo lines. This is such an easy, I won't say easy, it's such a simple way to add some impact to parts of your quilt. Now, I'm not going to do that in every part of my quilt. I'm going to use that to draw attention to the center. And so in this idea, like I'm just doing a couple of pebbles around that little bit and I'm calling it good. So you don't have to do difficult stuff over the whole quilt. That's the main thing here, right? Pick one or two areas to really use your quilting to do some wow quilting, and then keep it easy for yourself and do something easier in the rest of it. So again, echoing around the outside, adding some pebbles, and then once I had the outer ring and then the inner ring done, then I could add those wavy kind of design, wavy lines in the background. Again, if I had more time, I might have picked a different filler, but this wavy design is so quick to quilt, and it's going to be one that we learn in the upcoming Free Motion Challenge. When we talk about that, the designs we pick for the background area, one of the techniques is to add movement with your quilting. And so just having that nice gentle texture going between the two designs just help kind of flatten it down and let the other rings or other swirls stand out. Now, to make that happen even more, I switched thread colors. So remember, I'm using that kind of pink thread that contrasts just a bit on the quilt top because I like to see the quilting. But I wanted that background kind of wavy design to kind of disappear. So I used a light off-white color that really matched the background fabric. It's really kind of hard to see in this picture, but up close, it's just a subtle difference, and it kind of helps that kind of recede to the background so that those swirls kind of pop out towards the front. And then in the corners, I did the same thing. I was like, I have blocks in the corners, so I couldn't do, all the way out. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to do the same thing. Have those swirl chains kind of hit those corners, kind of curve along the blocks, and then fill in around with some more wavy lines. So again, using the same stuff over and over again in different parts of the quilt. Now I could say, like, that's for an artistic reason, right? I want to give it repetition. I want to make it cohesive, but we know it's just a little bit easier, right? So we can see I've got the swirl chain, and then this is actually the lower corner. So that block, I took some pink and quilted a bunch of that background filler kind of around there just to fill in the corner, did the swirl, and then came back and quilted those wavy lines in between there. Again, if you don't have to go as all out or quilt it to death like I do, but my motto has always been quilt it till it's dead and then add some more. And so I love quilting it to death. And then another picture of the corner. So when I started, I wasn't sure what I was going to do in each block, but I did know that I was going to use continuous curve and diagonal lines and maybe some feathers. And then I just marked some guidelines and then just let the quilting kind of create itself. Again, you might be like, that's easy to say, but once you get more comfortable with it, you can kind of imagine what that would look like. And here you can see a little bit more of that. The trick with quilting all these different designs, and to keep it from overwhelming, is using a thread color that blends in. And even though I used a pink thread, it's the same value. It's a very light pink, and so you just got a little hint of that color. So when you step back, you really, the quilting, I don't think, really doesn't really like take over, but it does give some beautiful texture and interest to those background areas just to kind of help bring it all together. And then I'm kind of stepping back and looking at the quilting there, and you can kind of see that bottom corner. So again, a lot of different designs, a lot of different textures, but loving how it turned out. And then this is the finished quilt. It's hard to see. You can kind of get a hint of that pink in the center, but like I said, when you step back, you just see those beautiful blocks and then the quilting adding some interest and hopefully beautiful texture in that background area. So the designs that you pick for your background areas are just as important as the designs you pick for your block. That they're going to create those effects that are going to help show off some of your favorite parts of your quilt. And so definitely a fun way to do that. Now, I want to tell you, you would think I've been quilting for 22 years, machine quilting. I do this professionally. It is my full-time job. But when I took the quilt off the rack and started looking it over, trimming up my threads, I realized that I had missed a block. Just didn't quilt it. Just missed it. Again, I don't want you to point out your mistakes, but I can because I'm a professional, so it's going to just stay that way. I'm going to just say something about how I love the juxtaposition of the unquilted next to the feather or whatever other BS I can come up with. But it's just good to know that sometimes, you might think, oh, they never make mistakes, but oh yeah, everybody does. Again, that's a lot to look over, but I think what's great about any kind of quilting designs that you pick is you can kind of just go in a direction that you like and use those designs that are versatile in a lot of different ways. Sometimes I feel like some quilters need to know every step before they get started. But what's amazing is when you start quilting, sometimes those designs or the ideas come to you. And so the joke is the best way to finish is to start. But don't be too stressed out about having everything planned out before you go, especially because you can always, come back and add more to it if you'd like. So that was my week quilting that quilt. A lot of fun. I love putting on my headphones and just kind of like listening to music or audiobooks while I just quilt my little heart out. And so it was a lot of fun. All right, looks like there's some questions over there. Jessica's getting a whole tons of paper. I love it. I love the questions, and I'm glad that you guys like asking them. It's just a way to make it feel a little bit more less like a video. Is your hand cramping now? She's like, Okay, what does it mean when the back thread shows on the front of the quilt? Right, so you're seeing that bobbin thread pulled up. That means you have tension that is not perfectly set. When you're making a stitch, that top and bottom thread should meet in the quilt. And if it comes up or below, it means that thread tension is off a little bit and you need to make some adjustments. So if it was a long arm, what I would say is lessen your top tension so it can kind of go back into the quilt. On a sewing machine, same thing. But if you have an adjustable bobbin, you might be able to do that too on there. How do you know how large a design can be in the background? That's so tricky. It depends on the design. It depends on the background. I can quilt, let's say, a flower in between blocks and make it look like it's going behind the block. And there was actually a couple of areas where I did that where there wasn't quite enough room for the flower, but I just made it run into the block. Using the space as a guide, and then if you're worried about it running out of room, instead of looking at your whole space, focus in on a smaller area. That way you can fill it in later. I know feathers, for instance, I need a little bit more room for those because they take up a little bit more space to develop. So the more you work with it, the easier that will get knowing if it will fit. I know that doesn't really help when you're like, okay, great. But that kind of helps guide my decision making. Did I do any quilting in the ditch on the blocks? Yes. So stitching in the ditch might sound like a bad word, but it's not. Stitching along the seams just helps kind of secure that block. I think it just looks nice, but it also helps me move my way around the block. So there are some blocks where maybe I've quilted one corner and then I use the stitching in the ditch to get to the next. I'm not stressing out of hitting all of those seams, but I'm just kind of using it as a guide. Hope it helps. But that's optional. You don't have to do it, so you can kind of decide. Any recommendations for the center of a wedding ring quilt top? Oh, those are so pretty. I've quilted a couple of them, and the problem is, if it's how I'm thinking, where they come together, you kind of have a bigger space, but it's curved on the outside. A couple things I've done in that example, I've done some motifs, which is a smaller kind of flower kind of shape, or I've actually done some of that diagonal dot to dot in there as well. It really just depends on where you want the attention to go. Do you want it to go to that center block, that center part? If it is, then that's where I would do my more ornate piece. If I want the attention to be more on the rings, I might just do something a little bit easier in there and then do something more detailed in the rings. So it just kind of depends on where you want that to go. I'm starting a quilt that has red, teal, gold, and cream. What thread color would I recommend? All right. So it depends on the value. And I say value, like how dark those are. It depends on if those are solids or prints. And it also depends on the amount of each color. Right, so if it was mostly cream and it had pops of the red and the teal and the gold, then I would go with cream. If you have to pick one thread color to do over the whole quilt, like maybe you're doing an all-over kind of design, I would look to, is it mostly medium kind of values? Is it mostly light? And I would pick a neutral in that value. So if, they were all kind of medium, I might go with a off-white or a medium light tan kind of color. I know that's not really helpful, but it really just depends on a lot of that and your preferences as well. If you're like, I don't really love red, then I might go with a like light teal color. Maybe one of these times we should have live chat where people send in their quilt talk pictures and I can help pick out threads. We should do that. Anyway, so sorry, that's not a really helpful answer there. I probably would change thread colors to really kind of show off the different blocks. But on the quilt that I just showed you, there's a lot of different colors there, and I didn't change the thread colors at all. So I'd rather, though, if I have to decide, have a lighter thread on darker fabric than a darker thread on it. So that's kind of my rule, if that helps. How do you train your brain to go the opposite way, like with feathers? It's a little bit of a training time, right? Because like if you've ever done feathers or a design where one side looks great and the other side looks like you didn't even know what you're doing. Like sometimes I would quilt and I'm like, that looks good, and it looks like I drank a bottle of wine before I did the other side. When that happens, just know that you're almost there, right? Like you're so close, just keep going and you'll eventually get it. It's that mirror image that our brains struggle with. I mean, think about when we were little, learning how to write. A lot of kids have trouble with their B's and their D's, right? Knowing which one goes which way. That's just the joy of it. It's such a fun journey, isn't it? So it comes together with practice, I promise. Why do I have pins in the quilt? That's a great question. Okay, so when I showed the unquilted center, we could see those pins in there. I didn't even think about mentioning why I did that. So when I'm quilting on a long arm, as I work my way down, that whole section needs to be quilted or stabilized before I move on. That means, like, let's say I want to wait and do my borders last. I need to stabilize those as I go, because what will happen is it will shift and I'll get tucks on the front. I saved the center of the quilt for the very last because I had no idea what I was going to do. So as I worked my way down, I used those corsage pins to help stabilize the fabric, and so I could come back to it when I was done with the rest of the quilt. That's not something I do a whole lot. Usually I just like to hit it while I'm there, but I couldn't decide what to quilt there, so it's kind of like taking a test. You just skip the question and come back to it. So that's why those are there. I could do basting stitches on my long arm, but the great thing about pins is if I put them parallel to the bar, they'll just roll up with the quilt, and I can take a pin out as I start quilting. Now on a sit-down machine, that's not necessary because you've already stabilized your whole quilt sandwich, so you don't have to do that, but that's what those pins are for. How few or many designs would I repeat in a quilt? That's a question I've been asked before. It's like, how many designs are too much for a quilt? I'm sure there are too many designs for a quilt. I've just never seen it happen. If you're using a lot of different designs, if the spacing is consistent between them, they all just kind of blend together, right? So I say go crazy. Quilt all the designs that you can do in a similar spacing. I usually kind of land on 3 to 5 just because I just kind of get in that routine, but you could definitely do more or less. With heavy quilting, does my quilt get stiff? Okay, so it's quilted to death, obviously. There's a lot of thread in there, but it's not stiff. It's not as stiff as you might think. The batting that you use will help give it that kind of drape, that nice cuddliness. Now, I use Quilter's Dream polyester batting because it has nice definition. It still has a nice cuddle to it. But if you want to quilt your quilts to death and still have them be cuddly, go with a natural fiber like cotton or wool or silk, and that's going to give you that nice kind of drape. And then the more you use it, the softer and softer it gets. Do I match my bobbin and top thread? Not really. So I used to. When I would wind my own bobbins, I would always match them. But once I got addicted to pre-wounds, it was just like, different world. So I don't match the color, but I matched the value. So that top thread that I quilted was a light kind of pink, light medium pink. It wasn't cotton candy. I can't remember what color it is now, maybe pink lemonade glide. And so then I did a light tan on the bobbin thread. So that's just to help, because sometimes I'll get those little pokies where you can kind of see it come through, and that just kind of helps hide it or help kind of disguise those. But that is also a personal preference. You can definitely do whatever you want there. What settings are my stitching, or what like stitch length? So I'm quilting in manual, so my stitch length is organic, even on this quilt. And so if I'm doing tiny pebbles, they might be smaller. If I'm doing bigger designs, they might be bigger. So it's an organic stitch length. But for newer quilters that do have a stitch regulator, I usually suggest 10 to 12 stitches per inch if you're wanting kind of a guideline. Did I quilt the blocks first and then go back and do the background, or did I do it all together? So I did it all together. I would quilt a block and then use the quilting in the background to help me move to the next block, quilt it, and then continue on. Just handling any of those gaps while I'm there. I just want to make sure the whole thing is quilted, that there's no unquilted areas, and so that's kind of how I'm managing it. However, if you're like, I want to do all the blocks and then come back and do the filler, kind of get into that mode, then that's totally fine too. My personality is such that I'm easily bored. So by switching it up as I go just kind of keeps me a little bit more engaged. On the long arm, do I do any stitch in the ditch to stabilize the sampler? So we kind of talked about that stitching in the ditch. I'm doing it as I go. Now, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here because I don't want to like bore you guys, but there's different ways you can handle the quilts, right? I could stitch in the ditch, do all my quilting, and then work my way down. But there's some long armers that like to stitch all their seams, work their way down to the bottom, and then come back and go back and forth and fill it in. And both of them are totally right. I just don't usually like getting to the bottom of the quilt knowing I have to go back up, even though this is the case I had to do this time. So I did stitch in the ditch, but not all first. I kind of did it as I went. And then when on my long arm quilting, when I'm long arming, where do you start quilting? At the top. It's very much like a typewriter, right? Going in rows. Now, the hard thing is to trust that it's going to be okay, because as I'm doing those different fillers and stuff, you're kind of just seeing glimpses of it, but everything is fitting within my throat space and I'm filling that in as I go. Great questions. Well, if you're not watching live and you're like, oh, I have a question or I'm not sure about something, leave it in the comment section. I love to get on there from time to time and answer, and other quilters are so generous with their information as well. So thank you so much. We do have a winner. The winner is Kathy, F-U-T-C-H, Fuch. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. So Kathy, email us at customerservice@quiltingismytherapy.com and we'll get your panel sent out to you. And don't forget, if you want a little jump start to your project or to pre-order the kit that you saw, you can click the link in the description box for both of those. And again, I won't be here next week. I hope you guys all have a great end of May and a beginning of June, and I'll be back soon with another live chat. Until then, everybody,